Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversation. Are you drinking? Oh, is this a practice run?
Yeah, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a practice run.
Oh, good.
It's a practice run.
Oh, yeah? It didn't feel like a practice
You
run.
can hear my drinking, though?
Yeah, because the thing is, the microphone is at your mouth, and you're drinking in your mouth.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversation on relevant topics related to behavior analysis. I'm Zachary Bird.
And I'm Caleb Davis. How's it going, Zach?
Caleb, it's going well, man. It's going really well. How's it going with you?
Pretty good. I'm excited. This is our third episode in season 3.
Third episode.
Good. Yeah, I'm feeling good about it.
Yes. I like the way this season is kind of shaping up. We have this back and forth between it's called the experience, right? And it's between the supervisor's experience and the supervisee or the trainee's experience. Our first episode was great because we were talking about supervision. We had Dr. Tyra Sellers on. And then our second episode, which I don't know if you caught this or not, Caleb, but this second episode was on determinism and is for the trainees.
Yeah, I caught it. I was there. I helped you. Literally, you and I were having a conversation during
Yeah, I know you were there, Caleb. Oh, man, did you listen? I mean, you listened to it, I guess, because you were literally listening to us. Okay, never mind. Forget it. Okay. Anyway, Caleb, I wanted to tell you, we got some good stats, some good feedback.
Some data?
Okay? So some data. Data are the best feedback. We had the most downloads of any episode in a 24-hour period after releasing the determinism episode. And I thought that was cool. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome, especially since it's the new format that we're experimenting with. Yeah,
so I also appreciate that there were some people that had given us some feedback about that. That's really appreciated. If anybody wants to jump in and add something, let us know what you thought. Like if you like the format or if you don't like the format or you wanted to add something to the format, we would love to hear from you. You can either jump on social media and leave us a comment or something, or you could send us an email at functionalrelationspodcast@gmail.com. And we'd really appreciate that. Any feedback is welcome.
For sure. And it's funny that you're talking all about receiving feedback, Zach, because that's actually the topic of this episode.
Caleb, what a smooth transition.
I know. What a segue.
Great job.
Yeah, so this episode is all about feedback in the context of the supervision experience.
Nice.
Yeah. Important. Very important.
Why, Caleb, do you think it's important?
That's a good question. I think that...
Thank you.
Good job. You're off to a great start this episode. Asking the tough questions. No, I think that personally, I've benefited from feedback throughout my career. So I've been in this field for over 10 years now. And I think when I first got into the field, I didn't value feedback as much as I do now. I feel like the longer I'm around, the more I care about feedback and the more I just see how it helps me as a professional. But when I first got into the field, I think I tended to get a little bit defensive when I would be given feedback.
Yeah.
I think I didn't see how helpful it was. And instead it kind of just came across a little bit like an aversive experience to me.
Right.
But I think over time, I just realized that you just have to have feedback to get better. None of us are going to improve our performance without receiving feedback, whether it be more critical feedback about things that we need to change or positive feedback pointing out the things that we're doing well and how we can do those more frequently and apply it in new situations and things like that. So I don't know. I just think that feedback is probably the most valuable thing somebody can give you in a professional context.
Ooh, I like the way that's said. We should
Thanks.
maybe make a poster, put your face on it and that quote, because I agree with it.
It's like
And
should be like on the ceiling above a dentist chair or something.
and the dentist's like, Caleb, you should really floss more.
And I just like look up. Feedback's the most important thing you can receive.
You started to get defensive,
Yeah.
and then you're just like, well, no, that's true. You're
Like,
right.
thank you. I appreciate that.
I should floss more.
You're a heck of a dentist for giving that feedback so freely.
Yeah.
But no, all joking aside, I do think that feedback is really important. And especially when you think about the topic at hand, which is supervision, our trainees need to receive so much feedback because there's just so many things to learn. So I think being able to deliver feedback effectively in a way that's going to really efficiently change trainee performance, that's just like a really valuable skill.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have other thoughts on feedback? Like, have you had similar experiences personally? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, very similar experiences. Like first getting to the field, I would just get so nervous and I would take it like, it's like the Dun and Krueger Effect where like I knew a little bit and I thought I knew a lot. And so when people gave me feedback, I was like, whatever. Yeah, right. I'm like the best. What are you talking about?
Oh yeah,
And
I was the exact same way. I think actually, can you explain the Dun and Krueger effect just a little bit for maybe some of our listeners might know that and are picturing this like the visual that you and I are, but can you just unpack that a little bit?
Sure. So it's like this psychological effect where basically as someone learns a little bit of something, they gain a lot of confidence. And then actually over time, as they learn more and more, they get less confident. So, and it's basically like this: on the y-axis is your confidence, and on the x-axis is experience or expertise. And basically, initially, there's this shooting up of confidence after someone knows a little bit, and then over time, it kind of has this U curve after, where like you learn a lot, and then your confidence actually kind of like bottoms out, which is kind of crazy as you become an expert. And then after many years and lots of expertise, later it kind of climbs back. Your confidence climbs back up. And so I just remember being at the top of this Dun and Krueger effect, having so little amount of knowledge, but feeling like I knew everything. I think all I knew was literally positive reinforcement, punishment, and extinction. I think that's all I knew.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. Yeah, where like when you first start learning about things, it just feels like you know so much. And now, I mean, I'm towards the tail end of a PhD program in behavior analysis. And I'm like, I wish I could be as confident as I was like 3 months into the field.
Right.
But I just feel like the more you learn, the more you acknowledge that you don't know everything and that you need feedback to get better in those areas that maybe you're still trying to learn. So
yeah. And something also is that as you grow and as you gain more experience in the field, you'll kind of go up in the ranks as far as like, when you start out as a direct care staff or on BCBA, when you're first starting out, you get lots of feedback. And I would just as some, I guess, advice is to not take it for granted, because it's how you're going to get better. And eventually it's possible you end up in a place like me where I feel like not that many people give me feedback.
Right, because you own your own consulting company, right?
Right. And so I kind of am the one delivering the feedback a lot, and I do my best to recruit feedback from my team members. And I value it so much when they do give me feedback. But I do feel like there comes a point where you get less and less feedback. I always try to make it a point that if someone does give me some feedback, that I show how appreciative I am of it, because I feel like if I have a defensive response or some response that I just don't want to punish that, right?
Yeah, I really like that point, Zach, about how the way you respond to feedback is important in the sense that, like, especially you as somebody who's the owner of a company and you in some ways rely on getting feedback from the people that you supervise to change your behavior. If you essentially, when they provide you feedback, if you provide like some form of like aversive stimulation for that, they're just going to stop giving you feedback, and then you're left without any feedback, and that's not the place you want to be. So it sounds like what you're saying is like you try to respond in a way that essentially functions as a reinforcer for their feedback giving behavior, right? So they're like, wow, Zach really appreciates when I give him feedback. In the future, when I see something that I feel like will be valuable for the company or a way that we can improve things, I'm definitely going to point it out because he received that so well, and I feel like he really hears me. Like that would be probably what you're trying to accomplish.
That's
with your
ideal,
company.
yeah.
Anyways, I think that something that's probably really important that we unpack right now is how feedback functions, because I think feedback sort of has this, I don't know, like there's some assumptions people might have about feedback in the sense that it's like always critical, or it's always functions as like a punisher or something like that. And that's not necessarily the case, right? Like feedback is just an environmental event that can serve any number of functions depending on its effect on behavior, right? So I think maybe we could just spend a little bit of time talking about like at least some of those functions, or maybe common functions of feedback. So I don't know, what are some functions of feedback that come to your mind, like right off the bat?
Yeah, that's a good point, because it is often a consequence for some behavior that someone observed or whatever, but the feedback can be an antecedent for future behavior, right? Either a discriminative stimulus, so it's like reinforcement is available if you do this thing that I tell you to do. You know, when I saw you delivering that training, I thought you did pretty well initially, but I think what really would have benefited you a lot was if you were to build some rapport at the beginning. Like, but while people are kind of filing in, I think it would be useful for you to kind of just chat it up with the people that are there, make them know that you're approachable, and that when it comes time to ask questions, they'll be able to ask questions because they're not nervous about who you are as a person. You came in with your professional attire, and you don't want them to be intimidated. So I think that might be a good thing for you to do next time. That comes in as a consequence, potentially a negative reinforcer for future, but then also it could be a discriminative stimulus. And you could have established a rule that says, all right, when I go into trainings, I'm going to chat with the people who are there so that maybe they feel less intimidated to ask questions or something like that, right? So it functions on both sides of that equation, the ABCs.
All right. Yeah. So essentially this example that you're providing is if you were in the position where you were supervising someone and they were providing a training to other people, and sort of through your observations, you see how they could improve their training. Is that right? That's like the situation that's setting the occasion for the feedback.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. And something that I like about your example is...
Are you providing me feedback? Hold on.
Yeah, Zach, I'm providing you feedback on...
Okay, great. Yeah. Very good. Okay, this is awesome. Thank you.
Let me know how I do at this. I feel like we're just going to go in some like spiral feedback.
It's like Inception.
It's going to be like a 10-hour episode. No, but what I was going to say is what I like about that example is you're providing feedback, and I think feedback should always have a dual function. Like I can't think of a situation where you'd ever want to observe somebody's performance and just say like, hey, I didn't like how for your example, like I didn't like how you didn't build rapport when people came into the training and you jumped right into things and it didn't seem like people were actively engaged. Don't do that anymore. That to me does not come across as good feedback. What you could say though, and I think you included in your episode, is, hey, like I noticed that when people came in, you didn't really take the time to build rapport with them. I also noticed that during the training, people didn't really seem to be engaged, or they didn't really actively ask questions and things like that. I think in the future, what you could do is when you get there, take a few minutes, take some time to build rapport, have some conversation with people, get to a point where you feel like they're comfortable and engaging with you, and then move into the training. Maybe that'll help create an environment where people are more likely to ask questions and things like that. So you're providing a consequence for essentially the behavior that you'd like to see changed, but not in necessarily a punitive way, in the sense that you are providing very clear instructions on what somebody can do differently in the future. And I just think that you should always have that second aspect to feedback.
Yeah, I agree. Hey everybody, if you're interested in getting a CE for listening to this episode, you can purchase it at functionalrelationspodcast.com. This episode is worth 1 supervision learning CE, and you'll need to provide 2 code words when you go to checkout. The first code word for this episode is bricks. 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 My house is made of bricks. Bricks. Let's run through it. So feedback can serve as an antecedent by establishing a rule or potentially as a discriminative stimulus. It could also, depending on the type of feedback, could also be an establishing operation. Can you give an example of how it might function as an establishing operation for future, establishing operation for reinforcement in the future?
Right. So, certainly I think it can be an establishing operation to establish essentially a negative reinforcement contingency. So when we think of, and again, this is an aspect of feedback that may exist where a sense that part of that feedback may be providing critical feedback in the sense that there's some performance that needs to change. And so certainly that can be aversive and sets the occasion for somebody to avoid receiving that feedback in the future.
Yeah.
But certainly when doing that, again, it goes back to setting the occasion for alternative performance so that somebody knows how to avoid that in the future. And then, have we talked about positive reinforcement yet? We should talk about positive reinforcement.
Yeah, so I think that would go along with the essentially as a discriminative stimulus, and then for the consequences, how feedback can function with consequences. I think let's start with positive reinforcement. Yeah.
I think that unfortunately, feedback people often associate with the stuff we just talked about, where
right.
It's something that people want to avoid.
Right.
But I think maybe a more important function of feedback is one of positive reinforcement, where maybe after you've provided some instructions on what somebody can do differently, when they do that, reinforcing the heck out of it, letting somebody know, that was great. That training you just gave, you implemented all the things that we discussed. You took some time to get to know your trainees. You were, they seem like they more actively engaged, which is awesome. Great work implementing those changes. That was awesome training. Something like that, where you are hopefully going to just strengthen that repertoire of, going back to your example, how to provide effective training.
Yeah, right. And, we always try to focus on, at least my aim, and then I think in the sort of recommendations I've seen from people like Aubrey Daniels and people like that, the recommendations have a ratio of 4-to-1. So it's basically 4 examples of positive feedback to every example of a constructive feedback. So I think the 4-to-1 ratio is important because that's how someone gains confidence. So if we think about when are we most confident, when are we feeling best about our performances, it's when our behavior is really strong. And positive reinforcement is how you strengthen behavior, essentially.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Now that I think we've kind of established the importance of feedback, and it's specifically how important it is when you're training somebody, or potentially when you're providing BACB supervision to help somebody sit for the exam, how you deliver feedback and being effective and efficient with it is probably going to be key for providing effective supervision in general.
Yeah, I would agree. I was thinking, Caleb, that it might be worth, I don't know about this. You can give me some feedback, but I think it's worth us going out, maybe finding someone who's an expert in the idea of feedback delivery and maybe they have some expertise that they could share with us on this topic. Do you think that that's a good idea, Caleb?
I do think that's a good idea, Zach. And for some reason, I'm not surprised that that's where we landed with this conversation. I feel like it aligns pretty closely with what we typically do. So
okay, good. Okay,
I think that's a great suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Caleb. All right, well, let's do that then. Let's go find someone that we can talk to about feedback.
Dr. Ellie Kazemi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's very nice to meet you.
Dr. Ellie Kazemi is a tenured professor at California State University at Northridge. She's also the Chief Science Officer at the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence.
Yeah, it's great to meet you too. Thanks for coming on today. So today we're discussing supervision and more specifically delivering feedback, which is obviously a really important topic and something that you're very familiar with. So we're really excited to have you on today. Perhaps a good place to start might be, do you mind just describing what feedback is?
Sure. I would say I use actually Aubrey Daniels and Bailey's definition of feedback, and that is information that I provide to another individual that allows them to change behavior, sets the occasion for them to behave differently.
Great, thank you.
That's a good definition. Very clean. That's what we like. It helps a lot.
Yeah, what I really like actually about that is that it puts me as just as responsible as the trainee in receiving the feedback. Meaning, if the information is not setting the occasion for change and or helpful in setting the occasion for change, I, as a supervisor, am just as responsible.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. Yeah, the student is always right.
Absolutely.
One thing we wanted to mention to you was that we've had experiences, many different experiences over time that, we've had supervisors that provided feedback that, that it was inspiring rather than discouraging. And we were wondering, do you have any advice for delivering this type of feedback?
That's a really good one. And I think at the core of that, what you are pointing out is that the feedback sets the occasion for behavior change in general. So not just one behavior or a specific thing I'm going to fix. Because I think when something inspires me,
right.
I think of that as pivotal. It sort of remains with me across time, and I can sort of go back to it and apply it in different places. It's an excellent question you asked her. You said, can I think of...
what might be the components of... or the keys to delivering a type of feedback that... Here, let me tell you an example. So when I was first starting out as what I would call a professional, I was out of undergrad. I went to the New England Center for Children, and I had a supervisor who was excellent. Chris Way, if you're listening. And one time, it was like my first week, I came into work 2 minutes late. Now, I'm thinking 2 minutes late doesn't really matter. In my previous job, as long as you were less than 5 minutes late, you weren't really late and whatever, right? So I go into work. I start doing my normal things because this is a residential school. I did my normal routines for working with my client. And Chris, who's my supervisor, calls me, Zach, can you come over here for a second? Yeah, sure. I come over. And I respect this guy a lot. And he basically said, Zach, I noticed you were 2 minutes late today. And I know it's not a big deal, but right here, I'm trying to develop professionals. And I think you have a lot of promise to be a really good professional. And I just wanted to point out that 2 minutes late isn't professional behavior. So I just want to let you know that. And hopefully in the future, you can adjust that. And to me, that moment, I was like, oh, dang. Like, this guy believes in me, number one. And number two, he's given me some advice that's going to help me in my future. And I've never forgotten that. Like that was inspiring and not discouraging to me, even though it was my first week and I was really nervous. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts about what are those kind of components. I think you touched on kind of like a generalization sort of thing where it like extends beyond the context in which the feedback was delivered. But
well, I would think that the feedback you received meets all of that, right? So it is clear that your supervisor was letting you know that the feedback is not to benefit them, but it is to benefit you. The other part of what's really, I think, inspiring about what you shared as a great example is that they reminded you that they see you as someone who can meet that. They gave you the benefit of the doubt and believed in you as a part of that. So you're not hearing that they're waiting for you to fall or that, they'd like to see correction, because if correction doesn't occur, you're not quite going to make the cut. Instead, what you were told is, this is the level I see you at. This is where I believe you could be. And that's what I'm trying to build. That, I think, is inspiring. And I'm willing to bet, Zach, that corrected more than just probably being 2 minutes late, because knowing that the supervisor is looking for something more inspires that pivotal, what else should I be doing as a professional? What is this class of behavior one calls professional? Because you see me as one. I'm becoming one of those, right? So I think it's a great example. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great take on that situation.
Yeah, and obviously that's an example of probably some exceptional feedback. What are some examples, or what are some things that maybe people should avoid, or some common mistakes that people, maybe engage in when delivering feedback? Obviously, when people become supervisors, they may not have a lot of experience giving feedback, so it is something, there's a learning curve there. Do you mind just talking about like what are some common mistakes people may make and what they can do to change that?
Sure. I definitely can tell you those. I wouldn't have become interested in feedback and supervision if I didn't make my share of mistakes. And if I didn't have the fortune of having wonderful people in my life that taught me and felt comfortable to share with me what could have changed about that feedback giving. And I continue to have that kind of relationship and feel fortunate to have that in my environment. I would say probably my top like 2 or 3 errors that I see quite often, and I definitely have made, are when the feedback you're providing doesn't feel like it's yours. You don't quite understand its function. You don't get its broader perspective as to why someone must do this. You deliver it as a part of a company policy, or here's what's expected of you. It's delivered as a should without a functional value, without any explanation as to how this fits the bigger picture for the person in any way. And I think that can come off very disingenuous and sort of appear like the supervisor is just a cop, someone who's sort of like, here are the things that you can be penalized for and be sure to follow them. And I think that, we make those errors because there are lots of shoulds we hear as we sort of grow up, and sort of the things that we might have been told to do, and then we just deliver them as supervisors, or potentially a part of a policy or a company-wide policy we're responsible for, and we can fall into those errors. So I think that's the first class of things I see that I would definitely try to avoid, and I continue to try to avoid. If I don't quite understand how this fits a bigger picture, I don't deliver it until I do, until I can connect it to something important for the person.
That's a good point.
I think the other one is that sometimes we provide feedback as supervisors were emotionally distressed. We're responsible for a lot of work that our supervisees may be responsible for. Our students represent us. No one likes to look bad. No one likes to look like they didn't have their stuff together. And sometimes under those conditions, we turn around and snap at the supervisee with a bit of that emotional, component to it, which can take away from the feedback feeling as if it's for the person, for the person's development, or the person's continued growth in any way in the relationship. And it can really come off as, you just want me to make you look good, or you're just angry because you effed up. And I think that is definitely a position we can fall under. There are lots of times where there's a lot of pressures on me, and when something goes wrong, I know that I have a component in it. Sometimes there are things I needed to correct, and now I'm catching them. I should be more proactive in catching them. So I have to really think carefully about the delivery of that for proactive change in the future, so it doesn't just come off as "Rawr!" And sometimes we can do that to people.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of like what I hear you say in that first answer was kind of like rationale, providing some rationale. And it reminds me of, I think there was some kind of like big tech company or something that they tried not to have these like specific policies and rules, but they wanted to kind of in some sense just have like people kind of follow the philosophical underpinnings of their core values or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, are you doing the thing you're doing in the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish at the company or not? And it seems like that falls into kind of like rationale thinking. It's instead of following a rule, it's following some reason or some rationale. Does that seem to align with what you were saying initially?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the second part, it seemed like wanted to really focus in on basically how if someone is making you, and I actually, when you say this, I'm thinking, oh man, I think I do this and I got to be careful because my reputation, it feels like I need to defend it. Mm-hmm. So if someone is representing me, then it's like, oh, then you are now part of my reputation. And so I can get defensive when someone else is not performing. Mm-hmm. And now, the way you've said this, you've mentioned it twice right at the beginning and right now, and it's hitting me. It's hitting me hard because I think about this like, okay, yeah, any feedback we deliver, we should be delivering it for the benefit of the person who we're delivering it to and not for our own benefit. So this was a really great point, and I'm going to need to mull it over for a while. So thank you for pointing it out.
I appreciate that.
So I have a couple of questions about those points you made. So let's say you are working for a company and part of that is delivering feedback on maybe policies and things like that aren't being followed. Mm-hmm. Do you think that simply taking a little bit of time and thinking about why those policies are important and sort of like incorporating that into your feedback is sort of the fix for that? Like, so if you have to deliver the feedback rather than just immediately kind of just saying like, you need to do this because that's a policy, do you think like kind of coming up with a rationale, like taking some time and thinking about that is helpful?
Mm-hmm. I do. I think, asking yourself, why are these things in place? What will they do at a bigger level for the organization? Why should a person care about the organization's health and well-being or its representation? How does that impact them? I think is important. And making those connections make people feel like they're a part of something bigger. And I think that's when we sort of, I think Zach's example of the type of feedback he received kind of says, you're about to become a part of a bigger world. This is going to be about something more than just a singular event or a singular person. And we all want to belong. We want to be a part of something great. We want to be together and just rock it. But we can forget what those criteria may be. And I come from an odd history, gentlemen. I don't necessarily see resistance to those rules as a bad thing. I see it as critical thinking, potentially, not always. So if someone wants to know more, like why, I'm curious, because there are times where policies are absolutely not functional and they should be questioned. I think it's appropriate to be in that position. It's also appropriate to learn when to ask that question. So I have no problem stating, this is fantastic, good critical thinking. You have an excellent point. I'd love to see you grow to a place and a position where your voice can be heard about this, and I'll be the one right behind you on this issue. Because there's also times where some policies actually set the occasion for lack of diversity, or they do not include people. And I think it's important that we don't just say follow. That's not my methodology.
Yeah, that's right. That's great. And when I think about that a little bit, I'm thinking if we have a policy that benefits the company. So, I mean, as ABA is becoming this corporate sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
there may be policies in place that are simply to benefit the company monetarily, right? And so when supervisors or whoever, because a lot of BCBAs are, in some sense, they're going to be delivering feedback about billable hours and these sorts of things, the number of billable hours you need to get. I mean, our team, we talk about billable hours. We actually call them client hours, and we try to get our heads away from the idea of billable hours because it's such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we talk about them as client-focused hours. So the things that we're doing toward our core values related to what's going to help the client. And so some of these are actual billable,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them may not be, right? We can attend meetings that are not paid for, but we think they're valuable for the clients. And so we might take part in those. But when we think about this, there are some policies in place that are just to benefit the company. How should supervisors go about delivering feedback like this? Do you have any thoughts about how we might align our values to something that like this?
Asking the tough questions today there, I see.
Ellie, did you think that coming on this podcast was just going to be a walk in the park?
No.
I'm just joking.
It's matching to those expectations. I love it. I think the topic at hand is one that we have to know is highly individualized, right? So I get asked about how do I give feedback about anything, and it's not. We are not structuralists. We're behavior analysts, and we have to take into consideration the person's history with whom we're speaking and make sure to build the type of relationship where our information, the information that comes out of our mouth, is in any way reinforcing and is going to impact the listener in any way. Because if it's not, we've not built the relationship to say it to begin with. We might as well reserve it until we have. And I don't think that relationship building or figuring out what our listener needs is ever going to become a cookie cutter system. No single child with autism is the same. No single parent is going to be the same. No two supervisees of mine have been exactly the same. People come with a set of history, with what feedback has done in their history, what a woman that looks like me may have done in their history, what it means for me to be their supervisor. And that could be rocking, wonderful, wide-eyed, tell me and I'll do anything you say. And it could completely be the other way, like, I need you to prove yourself to me first before I even bother making a move toward you. And I have to sort of get to understand my supervisee and do that informal assessment to develop the type of relationship that makes me valuable, I would say, first, before doing any of these things. The second thing I'd say is that I think our field as a whole would benefit from not dividing what we consider a company's bottom line or insurance providers from what we do as service. Because compassionate care is not independent from a third party that has to pay for that care. In fact, I would say the third party pressure to increase patient satisfaction has had a lot to do with our field finally learning, oh, shoot, I should be compassionate. There is social validity involved here. There's a correction that's happening that's viable, I think. So, as a supervisor, I'd say if you don't quite understand what that may be, hey, we're doing this thing and it seems to be about somebody else's bottom line, then you're in trouble because you're now carrying out something that you don't fundamentally think is good. And now you're asking your supervisor to do the same. They're going to detect it and it's going to be just as artificial for them. So I think as a supervisor, I ask myself, what is this logic? What's happening here? What's the fundamental truth as to why this was developed? What's the function of it? I mean, gentlemen, I work for the university, and believe me, so many policies that come are about to just leave the next day as politics change.
Yes.
There's going to be lots of things that we're being asked to carry out that, we can question. But if we sort of deliver it with that question, deliver it with, here's how I understand it, we're a part of a bigger system for a reason. Again, I think that that transparency is important. And also recognizing that if I'm a part of an organization, I'm not divided from its bottom line. If I'm a part of the university,
That's right.
I can see that policies come and go and that we're sort of not very logical about all of the things that we do, but I'm a part of the university. And so as long as I'm a part of it, I respect that there's a reason that those don't go right. I'm going to continue to help with those things. And I want my supervisees to know that as a part of our relationship. Does that answer your question at all? Sorry.
I think so. Yeah.
It got cut on meta.
No. It's also a complex bunch of contingencies in place, right? There's not a simple answer to it because, in some sense, we have to decide. This is my interpretation of kind of what you're saying. We're part of an organization. We have to decide: is this organization worth working toward their goals or their bottom line, because they're paying us. I mean, they are paying us, right? Mm-hmm. So in some sense, do I want to move forward and continue to work so that they can pay me the certain percentage that they pay me or whatever? Mm-hmm. And if we don't want to do that, we're lucky in this field that it's a booming industry and there are probably other options for us as long as we're focusing on the other sorts of aspects of our work, mm-hmm. like our professionalism and our, all the other skills. If we're developing those, we can have in the back of our mind whether we believe in this particular company or not. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's complex. I probably shouldn't have gone into this, like this.
No, I like it. I like the complex question because I do think that supervisors are never trained for that, right? We don't exactly get this training in our coursework as we're finishing our degrees. Right. Hey, you're going to work for an organization and they're going to ask you to carry out these sets of administrative things and provide feedback about things when all you have known is how to provide feedback about clinical care, appropriate procedural integrity and treatment and treatment of your family. So I think you point out a very important part of this, which is how do we now carry out those things with just as much care, with just as much understanding, and develop the type of relationship that makes our supervisees feel connected to those decisions, mm-hmm. connected to those That's policies, right. so that they don't feel that they're just robots or unimportant to an organization.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Something that I thought was really interesting that you incorporated into your answer was that before you even deliver feedback, I think this is what you said, before you even deliver feedback, you do some sort of assessment to kind of figure out the way to approach each supervisee individually. Did I understand that correctly?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You have to build a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more how you do that? Like how you might tailor your feedback style to meet certain needs in a way that develops that relationship so you have a productive, effective relationship and can deliver that feedback rather than creating this, relationship that might be full of resentment or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I'm the first to say that we're all learning. So, I want to point out that when I am speaking on this issue, I always have to point out that I've made my share of mistakes and continue to make my share of mistakes. I'm learning every day new things that I could do. And my goal is to just get that much better every day. That's really all I can do, is to get better and be open to hearing those things. I have to say that the building of relationships became much more apparent to me a few years after I began supervising students. It used to be that I would deliver it similarly to how I was supervised, which is, here's my mentorship style, here are my expectations, and sort of almost as if like the journey is now for you to show me that you will meet those. And that's kind of how I would begin my supervisory relationships. And it dawned on me that that sort of mentorship is very one way. It doesn't exactly leave room for the other individual to impact and teach me along the way, which makes me void of that learning experience. How sad for me. And it also is likely to be acceptable by a more narrow group of individuals. I might not be able to be as good of a mentor across board. That I need to sort of begin with some of those questions. Not here are my expectations, but to begin with, what do you expect to gain from supervision? How do you like to hear feedback? What has in your history been feedback like? I begin with questions and allow questions to occur back because you can't completely change yourself. There are going to be components of me that are going to be present as a woman, as a person with dark hair. I also talk with my hands. I come off pretty strong to a lot of people. I'm doing 100 things at the same time. So there's going to be components of me I can't change, and I have to sort of feel for it to see if this relationship will lend to the best outcome for that supervisee. I'm not going to be perfect for everyone. But I certainly can learn through the process. I can certainly leave room and open the door to say, what are your needs? Because ultimately my job is to set the occasion for the best learning environment for you. Because if you're not growing, you're not learning, I'm equally not providing that opportunity.
That's great. I like that you kind of start out by asking what are their goals in a sense? Like, what are they trying to work towards so you can kind of help them on their journey? I also think it's good to discuss feedback as you're entering into the relationship, because especially if you're, a BCBA and you're providing supervision as somebody's working towards their BCBA, there's a lot of feedback involved in that. So I think it's better just to discuss that and how that's going to be part of the process. And so that it's just a very transparent way of starting things off. So thank you for discussing that. Is there anything else that you haven't talked about today that you think is important for people to know or think about when it comes to delivering effective feedback?
No, probably the only thing I would say is that at the core of it, we need to change our culture with regards to feedback. I think that people who enter the field of behavior analysis are no different than people in, medicine, nursing, pilots. I think as an entire culture, we have difficulty with feedback, and we have to go back to our educational system and our history and say, what is this feedback loop? What has it looked like in the past? What can I understand more about it? Because the way I explain it to my students is that, you wouldn't learn to ski without the environment providing you with some very clear feedback, right? And we don't quite see that as feedback, but it certainly is. There's nothing we learn to do, not walk, not talk, without the environment correcting and getting us to a more refined place where it's efficient and the behavior works for us. What's difficult is now we're social deliverers of that feedback. It isn't some kind of direct feedback from that environment that does not involve a social party. So the social relationship becomes complicated. And I think we need to have some transparent, open conversations with the supervisees about what that growth is going to look like. If our ultimate goal is their growth, they're likely to be on board and teach us how to do it better.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I really hope that you can join us again sometime. I've really enjoyed it.
Ditto. It's very, very nice to meet both of you. Thank you so much for having me on board. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the hard questions. I love them.
Thank you.
All right, we're back after our interview with Dr. Ellie Kazemi. Zach, I cannot wait to discuss this interview with you, but first, let's take a little bit of time.
Okay,
Just hold your horses. let's just take a little bit of time to thank our Patreon members.
Oh, yeah. That's a worthwhile thing to do. Thank you, Caleb, for reminding me. I wanted to thank all the people who support us on Patreon. We have a number of people who you can actually find them on our website who are supporting us. They're called loyal listeners. These are the people who support us at the highest level on our Patreon page. So go to our website and check that out. If you're interested in what that all means, I want to tell you that Patreon is a website that allows listeners to access things like behind-the-scenes posts, bloopers, updates, and we also send out small gifts to our members to show our appreciation. In fact, this season, season 3, we are uploading video interviews. So this interview you just heard with Dr. Ellie Kazemi is available in video form for our Patreon members. You can learn more about becoming a Patreon member at www.patreon.com/functionalrelationspodcast. We'll leave a link in the show notes if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, and if for any reason, like, just join Patreon so you can see the video of Zach podcasting from his really tiny closet with foam like duct taped to the wall.
Yeah, I mean that's available. That's there. You could see.
I don't think that's listed as like one of the benefits of being a Patreon member, but I think maybe it's the most important one.
Thank you, Caleb. Yeah, I did turn what is now our bedroom. Initially, it was just our office, but now it's our bedroom because we have 2 kids and one of them stole our actual bedroom. So now my bedroom closet is a podcast studio. I'm sorry to Angie, my wife. Hopefully, we can find a place to put our clothes.
That's actually hilarious because I didn't know that. I didn't know that this was your bedroom closet. So yeah, what actually are you doing with your clothes?
Like off the record?
Yeah,
we have our bed. Our bed has these pull-out drawers underneath them.
Oh, okay.
It works pretty well, but not great.
All right, so let's go ahead and discuss the interview that we just had with Dr. Kazemi. Something that's kind of funny, Zach, is do you remember in episode 1 of this season when we were talking to Dr. Sellers, how she pointed out that Dr. Kazemi had this like really excellent chapter on feedback?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, well, it's awesome that she mentioned that because we had already emailed Dr. Kazemi about coming on to talk about feedback. And so it's kind of like funny that Dr. Sellers, obviously there's some IOA there in the sense that we're like, Dr. Kazemi is somebody we want on to talk about feedback.
Yes. Yeah, I felt pumped. Like when she said that, I was just like, all right, that means we're on the right track here. I don't know what Dr. Kazemi has in mind, but I think it's going to be good. And it turned out to be good.
Absolutely. What were the big things that stuck out to you, Zach, from the interview?
The interview I thought was awesome. Like I really appreciated Dr. Kazemi coming on because I feel like her perspective is just really refreshing, and to hear someone like her talk about, the relationship building and how, here is a part that I just thought was awesome, which is she mentioned something about how generalization can occur as a response to feedback delivery. So I hadn't thought about this before, but the example I gave was someone had given me some feedback and I felt like it changed more than just my being on time behavior, right? Just it affected more than that. And she was basically saying, yeah, of course it did, because this person essentially framed you as a professional. And the entire class of behavior related to professionalism essentially was strengthened in that moment. And I had never thought about that, how essentially feedback can also affect just far-reaching areas of our repertoires that may not have been specifically selected for feedback. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I thought that was a good point, and it does sort of account for the effect that you saw in your own behavior, right? So I'm
That's right.
assuming you kind of
Exactly.
described that it went well beyond just showing up to work on time, right? Like you sort of like that repertoire was strengthened, even though it wasn't specifically noted or pointed out within the feedback. So yeah, I think that's kind of
Yeah.
an interesting thing, and probably something we should try to do, right? When we're delivering feedback, is like if we can get like biggest effect from it, that's probably something we should do. Because you could have just received feedback in that situation by the person saying like, I need you to, it's important that you're on time. Please make sure you're on time in the future. Right. And,
That's right.
and that might have affected your on time behavior, but it might not have had the far reaching effects. So yeah, it seems like there's something to that. Like if you can tie in some rules or like, it's like some principles or something like that to have farther reaching effects.
Yeah, because actually you can think of it in both ways, which is that the effect of positive reinforcement sometimes is generalization of skills, like the strengthening of the entire class. But I think I would say that there's a warning to be had there too, which is that the opposite can happen. You can potentially, on accident, if you're delivering constructive feedback and it's not very specific, you could essentially punish a whole class of behavior and you didn't want to. So that's an important thing to think about too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Was there anything that stuck out to you as far as the interview?
A point that I really liked that Dr. Kazemi made was that feedback really should be designed to benefit the listener. So the person that you're giving the feedback to should be the one that benefits from it, and not necessarily the speaker. Right.
True.
So if I'm the one delivering that feedback, I shouldn't be the one like necessarily that's benefiting the most from it. It really should be the person that I'm providing the feedback to. I think that something else to consider is generally most of the jobs in ABA are in the human services industry.
That's right. Yep.
And so I think something we should also consider is that generally the overall goal, like the big picture, is that we're providing and helping our clients as much as possible. Right. So that could vary a little bit what that looks like depending on the exact sort of like mission of your company or something. But I would say overall, the mission of an organization is to benefit the people you serve. And certainly if your employees are performing at a high level, it's going to contribute to that mission of benefiting the clients. But I think that's important to remember, is that's not where it ends. It's not just about like developing professionals. It's about developing professionals that are going to be able to best serve the clients that they're interacting with. And so I don't know. I just wanted to take it to like that next level, because I don't think it should just be like a hyper focus on like, I need to make sure that this individual is like the best professional as possible and lose sight of like why that's the case.
Yeah. Great point.
I think tying that into the feedback that you're giving can also be really important too. So like telling somebody like, I need you to do this thing, because if you're able to do this thing more effectively, this is going to benefit our clients. And that's what we're all here for. That's our mission. We're all working together on that. So you own a company, Zach. Like, what's the mission of your company?
Oh, well, let's
pop
see.
Quiz.
Caleb, pop quiz. All right. Let me go to the website and I'll be with you in a second. Okay. So the mission of Principled Behavior Consultants is to provide the highest quality of behavior analytic consultation services available. Our commitment to our clients is one built on trust, respect, and collaboration. Evidence-based assessment and treatment methodologies are the foundation of our services, and we are always focused on the ethical delivery of individualized services that are practical for our clients and their stakeholders. So if we think about that as a mission, we want to be doing things like, I could potentially deliver feedback that says like, that may not be practical for the family that we're working with to have that in the BSP, because that seems really complex. And remember, our mission is to really create a situation where the services are practical for our clients and their stakeholders. So you can kind of align the feedback with the mission of the company. And so I think that's an important one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that applies to even things like in your example that you gave when we're talking to Dr. Kazemi, you gave the example of like showing up on time, right?
Right.
So just from you reading the mission of your company, if somebody wasn't showing up on time, that is directly related to your mission, right? Like, how are you going to provide like these high quality services and
That's right.
build like this level of trust with your stakeholders
Nice.
if you're not showing up on time, right? So I think like tying it into like a big picture, like it certainly develops somebody as a professional, but even larger than that, like a professional that's part of this company that's really devoted to its mission of like serving its clients and stakeholders. I feel like I'm doing a commercial for your company right now. That is not my intent, but
thank you, Caleb.
I will say if it serves that purpose.
Yeah, we do have consultant positions open. So if anybody's interested, just email me at zachary.bird at principalbehavior.com. Yeah. Thank you, Caleb.
But yeah, that was not intentional.
Okay, well, thank you anyway.
Yeah, no problem. So does that make sense to you? Like, I feel like that tying things into the mission ultimately that's kind of like the end. It's where like that feedback, the goal and everything, like that's where you land is like, how are we working towards this mission? Hey, everybody. If you've been listening to this whole episode and you're interested in getting a supervision CE, the second and final code word is audio. 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 We bought some new mics for this season, and I hope you're enjoying the new audio. When you finish the episode, head over to functionalrelationspodcast.com to purchase your learning CE. Oh, and also, if you're in need of ethics CEs, you can get 2 ethics CEs for any of our episodes from season 1. So be sure to check those out.
Yeah, and I think that is something that everybody who's working in the field needs to think about, which is that if you are working for a company that you believe wholeheartedly in the mission and the values of that company, then it makes sense to tie everything into it. If you work for a company that you don't believe in the mission, which I don't know if I'm sure there's some that exist, but most of the time the mission is something that people can get behind. But if you're not into the values, then you should find a place to work that's different, because you really do want to be able to deliver feedback and to receive feedback in a way that's aligned with the mission of the organization that you believe in personally. So I think that's a really important piece. Caleb, I wanted to say that I feel like, Caleb, this was probably one of our better episodes in our entire functional relations catalog. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think that the topic is just one that's super valuable. I think we've talked about how feedback just in general is how we've learned to appreciate it over the time and like how just valuable it is to us. But I also just feel like we all are interacting with feedback on a daily basis in our work and, just life in general. So I hope that this topic is one that everybody can see how it applies to their work and what they're doing in the field.
Yeah. And I think if you're interested in hearing more from Dr. Kazemi, it would be worthwhile to check out her book. She's got a book called Fieldwork and Supervision for Behavior Analysts, a handbook. And I think that would be really valuable to jump in there and learn from her additionally. Like, this is kind of an intro to some of the work that she has, but I think everyone would benefit from learning more. So we'll put a link in the show notes related to this book. And so anyway, I thought this was great. Thank you, Caleb. Do you have anything else to add?
I don't think I have anything else to add about the episode. Just a reminder to people that this season we are offering supervision CEs for episode 1. So the one with Dr. Tyra Sellers. And then this episode is also going to be worth 1 supervision CE. So if you do need supervision CEs, just know that those are available. And just a reminder that season 1 is available for ethics CEs. So if you're in need of ethics CEs, you can also access those by going to our website.
All right. Thank you, Caleb. Yeah, good note. And next episode will be our second student episode. So anybody interested in hearing that one, check that out. If you haven't heard the first one, that's on determinism, you can find that in the Functional Relations archives in your podcast app, anywhere podcasts can be found. All right, Caleb, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, Zach, talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.